Betrayal in the family home, a son's fight to preserve his legacy. It was supposed to be just another regular work trip. A few meetings in Chicago, nothing special. I left on Tuesday, texted Mom like I always do, and didn't think much of it. But when I came back, everything had changed. I pulled into the driveway, thinking it was just another weekend to unwind. The familiar smell of the yard, the old creaky steps of the front porch, all those little things that reminded me of home. But then, I saw it. A moving truck parked outside. At first, I thought maybe Mom was finally decluttering, clearing out some of the old furniture she'd been talking about. But as I walked up to the door, a chill ran down my spine. The sold sign in the yard hit me like a slap across the face. I stepped inside, expecting to hear the usual sounds of Mom in the kitchen, maybe the TV in the living room. But instead, there were strangers in our space, measuring windows, discussing curtains like they owned the place. And there was Dante, my stepfather, grinning like he was hosting some budget HGTV show. "Didn't expect you back so soon," he said, not missing a beat, as if everything was perfectly normal. I stood there, key still in hand, my mind racing. "What buyers?" I managed to ask. "We got a great offer," he said, as if that explained everything. "Market's hot right now. You don't need this place anymore, right?" I looked at Mom. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale, staring into a cup of coffee like it held the answers to everything. The words didn't hit me all at once, but when they did, it felt like the ground beneath me gave way. "You don't need this place anymore." I'd been paying the property taxes for years, keeping it alive, making sure that the memories of my dad stayed intact. And now, just like that, it was gone. I couldn't find the words to argue, so I didn't. I just smiled, turned around, and walked out. I didn't say a word. I didn't even look back. But that was just the beginning. My father had passed away 5 years ago. The house that once held his laughter, his presence, was now just a quiet shell. It wasn't a grand mansion. It was a modest 3-bedroom ranch-style house. The kind that felt like home from the first step you took inside. The floors creaked in all the right places, the kitchen always smelled like freshly baked bread, and the basement, it was more than just a room with old tools and dusty shelves. It was where my dad spent most of his time, building, fixing, creating. I learned how to use a hammer, a drill, even a lathe, right there, beside him. That basement was where I'd become who I am. It was where I built my first birdhouse, where my dad patiently taught me how to make my first chair, and where we shared laughs over his terrible woodworking jokes. The memories were etched into the walls, like pieces of my heart scattered in every corner. But it was more than just the house. It was the foundation of my childhood. And when my dad passed, my mother and I were left to hold onto that foundation. I kept paying half the bills, kept fixing things around the house on weekends, and kept the memories alive. But it was becoming harder, and I wasn't sure if I was keeping the house together for the right reasons anymore, or if it was just because I didn't know how to let go. 3 years ago, my mom remarried James. He seemed like the kind of guy who was always looking for a way out of the past. Always looking for a bigger house, a better car, a more upscale neighborhood. He was driven, sure, but not by the same things my dad had been driven by. He was driven by a desire to leave behind whatever didn't serve him anymore, his history, his connections, even his roots. And my dad's workshop? To him, it was just old junk. "Why don't we just move somewhere nicer?" James would say, every chance he got. "This place is nice, but it's not what we deserve." To him, the memories in those walls didn't mean a thing. He wanted a new life, a fresh start, somewhere that didn't remind him of a time he wasn't part of. And that's when I started to wonder if this fight, my fight to hold on to everything my father had built, was worth it anymore. Before I share what happened next, the moment that made everything change in an instant, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight for something you believe in, hit that like button, because this story is just getting started. When I returned from my business trip, I wasn't expecting much. A couple of days away for work, some meetings, nothing out of the ordinary. But when I turned the corner onto our street, something was off. The familiar driveway, the old oak tree in the front yard, it all seemed the same, but something wasn't right. And then I saw it. A moving truck. Parked right in front of the house. I stopped for a moment, trying to make sense of it. Maybe Mom was just getting rid of some old furniture. She had mentioned cleaning up a bit, decluttering the house, but this? This wasn't just clearing out old boxes. I walked up the steps, my mind racing, my heart already sinking. And that's when I saw that old sign in the front yard. My stomach twisted. It was like a punch to the gut, one I never saw coming. I froze for a moment, standing there, key still in my hand. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I thought maybe it was a mistake, maybe I was seeing things, but no. The sign was real. The house, our house, was no longer ours. I stepped inside, hoping for some explanation, some sign that this was all just a misunderstanding. But what I saw hit me even harder. Strangers were walking around the living room, measuring windows like they were already planning to hang curtains. The place I'd spent years of my life in, the space where my father had built everything, gone. And there he was, James, standing like he was the one who belonged here. He was showing them around, his voice as casual as ever. "Didn't expect you back so soon," he said, as if this was just another regular day. I stood in the doorway, my mind racing, my body frozen. "What buyers?" I finally managed to ask, my voice tight, laced with confusion and anger. James shrugged, like he didn't have a care in the world. "We got a great offer. Market's hot right now. You don't need this place anymore, right?" He didn't even hesitate. As if this was all part of his plan, as if it was just another deal to him. I looked at my mom, hoping, praying, for some kind of sign. Something. But she just sat there, at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup, staring into it like it held all the answers. She wouldn't even look at me. I turned back to James, trying to hold it together. My father's workshop, the one place that had always felt like home, the one thing I could still hold on to, was gone. All of it, every tool, every piece of wood my dad had ever worked with, gone. I opened the door to the basement, the place where I spent countless hours with Dad, and the silence hit me harder than anything. It was empty. Just concrete floors and bare walls. The pegboards, the workbench, all the things my dad had spent years building, teaching me, everything had been taken. Donated, James had said. Donated to charity. I turned back around, the weight of the loss crashing down on me. My hands clenched into fists, but I said nothing. I couldn't. It felt like my world had just crumbled. But I didn't let them see it. I didn't let James see how much this hurt. I smiled instead, a tight, controlled smile, and walked back up the stairs. I grabbed my phone from the kitchen counter, my hand still shaking. Without another word, I stepped outside. The air felt colder now, somehow. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I already knew what I had to do. And it was going to be the last thing James ever expected. I could feel the anger rising, the frustration building in my chest, but I refused to let it control me. If I reacted now, it would only give them the satisfaction of seeing me lose my cool. So I did something I never thought I would, I walked away. No shouting. No arguments. I didn't even look back as I closed the door behind me. The driveway felt longer than usual as I walked to my car. The weight of everything that had just happened hung in the air like a thick fog. But instead of rushing to confront them, I did the opposite. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I didn't need to fight right now. I didn't need to say anything more. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I slid into the driver's seat, grabbed my laptop from the passenger seat, and opened it. The cold light of the screen was the only thing illuminating my face in the silence. My fingers hovered over the keys, but the moment I started typing, everything clicked into place. I wasn't going to play by their rules. I was going to play by mine. I opened a new email, typed the address, and in the subject line, I wrote, "Official documentation regarding property ownership and financial contributions." The email was short, precise, and to the point. I didn't waste time on emotions, just facts. I attached the property deed, the records of every payment I had made for the house over the years, and a few other documents that made it clear I was more than just a son who wanted to hold onto old memories. I was a rightful owner, an active participant in maintaining what was once our home. When I hit send, it felt like the first true step in regaining control. A part of me didn't even need to look back to see if they were watching. I knew they were. The moment I sent that email, everything had changed. I had already taken the first step in making sure they understood who had the power here. The ball was in their court now. I sat there for a moment, the engine idling, my hands resting on the steering wheel. I couldn't help but smile, just a little. This wasn't going to be a quick fight. But it was one I was ready for. And in the silence of that moment, I knew they wouldn't see it coming. The morning after I sent the email, I woke up to a flood of missed calls. 12, to be exact. All from James. His voice was frantic in each voicemail, his desperation thick with every word. "You need to call me, now. This is a mess." I didn't reply right away. I wasn't in any rush to hear his excuses. In fact, I wanted him to stew for a while. Let him feel the weight of what he had done. Let him sweat. Around noon, the doorbell rang. I wasn't surprised to see it was James, his figure visible through the peephole, pacing back and forth in the hallway outside. I let him wait another minute before opening the door. The moment he saw me, he launched right into it. "The sale can't go through," he blurted, his eyes wide with panic. "There's a problem with the paperwork. The buyers are threatening to back out." He was clearly shaken, rattled by something, and I wasn't about to let him control the conversation. I let him rant for a minute, his words tumbling out in a flurry of excuses and frustrations. But all I did was stand there, arms crossed, not reacting, letting the silence stretch between us. He could talk all he wanted, but it wasn't going to change the outcome. When he finally took a breath, I reached for my phone on the counter and pulled up the property deed. The familiar legal document was like a weapon now, one I knew I could use to dismantle his plans. I held up the screen for him to see, calm but firm. "Joint ownership," I said. "Signed by both my mom and me. You can't sell the house without my signature." His face, which had been flushed with anger and panic, turned a shade of pale I didn't think was possible. For a split second, I allowed myself a small, victorious smile, but I quickly masked it. This wasn't over, and I needed to stay focused. James tried to recover, muttering something about how he didn't know, how he thought he could still get away with it, but I wasn't listening anymore. I wasn't about to let him get away with it. "What about the workshop?" I asked, my voice low but sharp. "The tools. Where are they?" For a moment, James didn't say anything. He just stared at me, his mind working overtime, probably trying to come up with another lie. "We donated them," he finally said, as if it were a perfectly reasonable explanation. My jaw clenched. "You had no right to donate anything," I replied, my tone rising just enough to show I wasn't about to let this slide. His eyes flickered with something that could only be described as guilt, or maybe fear. Whatever it was clear he hadn't thought this through. I stepped toward him, keeping my voice steady. "You can't just give away my father's things, especially without my consent. You don't get to erase what this house meant to me, to my family." There was a long pause, the weight of the words hanging in the air between us. James opened his mouth, probably ready to make another excuse, but I didn't let him. Instead, I stepped back, allowing the silence to settle. "You've made your move. Now, I'm making mine." And in that moment, I knew. The tide was turning. The real twist came when I realized something I hadn't fully understood until then: I wasn't alone in this fight. Over the past few years, I'd been quietly working behind the scenes, building a plan of my own. I had been acquiring properties in the neighborhood through an LLC, nothing too flashy, just a few rental homes and vacant lots that came up for sale. Slowly but surely, I had become the majority stakeholder in the HOA. James had no idea. Not once had he suspected that I had quietly shifted the balance of power right under his nose. When the emergency HOA meeting was called, I already knew the stakes. I walked in, calm, confident, with the full support of the neighborhood behind me. They weren't just passive bystanders, they were invested. I had earned their trust by quietly improving the community, helping out where I could, and listening when they needed someone. The moment I stepped into that room, I knew I had the upper hand. I waited for the right moment, and then I stood up. The room quieted as I addressed the board, but I wasn't looking at them, I was looking directly at James. I could feel his eyes on me, his discomfort obvious. He had no idea what was coming. "I'd like to propose an amendment to the HOA bylaws," I said, my voice steady but filled with authority. "As you all know, the sale of 1427 Oak Street is on the table, but I believe we need to consider the long-term impact on our community. The buyers intend to make structural changes that could alter the character of our neighborhood, and I don't think we can let that happen without thorough approval." I paused for effect, letting the words sink in. I could see James's frustration building. He opened his mouth to object, but I wasn't done. "Furthermore," I continued, "I'd like to point out that James here has a small problem. His realtor's license expired 3 months ago, and he's been operating without it ever since." The room went completely still. The air seemed to thicken with tension as everyone processed what I'd just said. James's face went from red to ghostly pale in a matter of seconds. He stammered, trying to recover, but the damage was done. I had dropped the bomb, and now there was no going back. The whispers began almost immediately. People turned to look at him, their disbelief palpable. I could feel the support of the room solidifying around me. These weren't just strangers or acquaintances, they were neighbors who knew what James had tried to do, who had seen the way he'd treated my family and our home. "I've made my case," I said, sitting back down, feeling a rush of satisfaction as James fumbled for words. But it was over. The sale was blocked, and James's plan fell apart in front of everyone. I didn't need to say another word. The community had spoken. James had underestimated me, and now he was learning the hard way that you don't mess with people who are rooted in something deeper than profit. The sense of justice was overwhelming. It was more than just winning a battle, it was about protecting what mattered, about standing up for something that couldn't be bought or sold. I looked at James, his face still red, but now he was silent, defeated. The room was buzzing with conversation, the whispers of victory and support filling the space. And in that moment, I knew I had won. Not just for myself, but for everyone who had stood by me, for everyone who still believed in what our neighborhood stood for. James had lost. And it felt damn good.